About a year ago, I did a video all about how the pros really fish for those big girls during the spawn, especially when it comes to tournaments. I got some strongly worded emails about that video, so I figured, you know what? It's time that I did it again. This time, we're tackling chatterbaits and all the crazy ways you never even thought about using them before. Stick around, you don't want to miss this one.
Come on, I got him. Where's that grass? Oh, that's a fish. Well, he's trying to dig, trying to get away. That's a nice fish there, buddy.
Welcome back to Lowbrow Fishing, and as I said in the opening, last year I did a video about how the pros fish beds during tournaments. A couple of guys saw that video and they were able to snag some nice fish, which in turn caused me to get a couple of not so nicely worded emails about how I cost those pro anglers money because other people were catching their fish. Well, if you knew those fish were there, why didn't you catch them sooner? Why do pros always leave fish for the second and third day that they know are there? Seems to me like you would catch all the fish that you would want, right? The weight is all strung together. It's not like the board is wiped clean every day. So you see a big fish, you catch a big fish, but whatever. Anyway, today we're doing a deep dive. We're going down the rabbit hole of chatterbaits, bladed jigs, vibrating jigs, whatever you want to call them. Because while a lot of guys know that they're versatile, they don't know exactly how versatile they can be. And the way that I discovered this is a pro angler buddy of mine told me one time. He said, you know, when people tell you that if you're not good with a particular bait, keep that rod in your hand until you figure it out. If you're not good with crankbaits, keep that crankbait rod in your hand and keep working it until you get it figured out. But he said, go one step farther. When you go out to the lake, bring nothing but that bait with you. Don't fish anything but that bait, and not just one day, but several consecutive days until you really get in tune with how that bait works. I did that with bladed jigs. I took nothing but bladed jigs. I headed out to my local fishery, the big lake, and I fished it around. I kept that rod in my hands and I tried to see just exactly how many different ways I could work it. And it was amazing. And the thing is a lot of the pros are doing these exact same things and they're not telling you about it because, well, I get it. Pros need to make money. That's what they're there for. So they don't need some local schmo competing with them on that lake to try to take away some of the money that they need to earn. But before we get started, if you like bass fishing content that tries to be inclusive, whether you fish from a boat or whether you're fishing from the bank, and we're always keeping budget in mind because not everyone's got a lot of money to spend on bass fishing tackle, well, click that subscribe button. This is the channel for you. And while you're down there, I would really appreciate it if you gave this video a like. Thank you so much. So, bladed jigs, right? Pretty common. Everybody likes a chatterbait. Everybody likes a jackhammer. Standard fare, right? This is a 1/4 ounce, just your regular $4 or $5 chatterbait. I've got your typical boot tail or paddle tail swim bait on the back. This is what we all think of. You tie it on a bait cast with some fluorocarbon line and you chuck and you wind, right? Maybe vary up the retrieve a little bit. That's the basics of this. That's what most people think is all there is to that. But there is so much more. First of all, I hardly ever use a boot tail. I hardly ever use a Kitech or a Rage Swimmer or whatever as my trailer on a bladed jig. And the reason for that is, and I did a video about this, and I'll link that in the description. I did a video where I showed different trailers on a bladed jig and how they impact the action. What I like most, and if you're a regular fan of the channel, you know this already, I like a fluke, or in this case, this is a caffeine shad. These things are great. They've got that floppy tail right there. And this is on a Berkeley slobber knocker, a 1/2 ounce, and I just love that action. It allows that blade to really work without the drag of the boot tail on it. That tail flicks around and it makes a great enticing bait. And I have caught not just a lot of fish, but some giants doing this. Some of the biggest fish I've ever pulled out of the big lake 4, 5, 6 pound bass or more I've done using this exact technique. You know, the color of the bladed jig and the type of the bladed jig may vary. It may be a slobber knocker one day, it may be a Strike King Thunder Cricket another day, or it may even be just a regular old chatterbait. But still, that's the trick that I use to really get that bait to work out its action. But I went further than that, you know, because bass get really sly. They get to where they know what you're throwing, so they get turned off by that. So another thing that I did was, well, you guys know, I like to take the skirts off of my jigs a lot of times. And that's what I did. And that's when I'm going to use something like a little swim bait. See, this is just a Crush City by Rapala. This is just a Mayer. This is a 3-inch one, again, on a normal little 1/4 ounce chatterbait. And this right here, this works a lot of times if you're thinking like an underspin, right? This is a lot like an underspin, except it's got more thump to it. It's got more action under the water. It's got more wriggle to it. And it's not just a straight chuck and wind. I can vary up my retrieve. And I do that. I retrieve those baits a lot differently than you think I do. And we're going to get to that. We're going to talk about the retrieves that I'm doing. But there's so much to get to, right? As you can see, there are already a lot of ways that you can fish a bladed jig. They are exceptionally versatile. And you don't have to stop there. Good old chatter tube, where you take your favorite tube, right? And you thread it on to a bladed jig. Take the skirt off, obviously, and you just thread it on there. And this gives you some amazing action. It's the best of both worlds. Not just a tube, not just a chatterbait. You can get a little bit of the twirl on the fall, but you also get some thump and vibration. It's an amazing way to work a bladed jig and get some of those strikes that nobody else on your lake is doing. And it's so simple to work a chatter tube. There's nothing really crazy about it. It's not necessarily chuck and wind, but you can maybe yo-yo it a bit. You can maybe hop it. You can maybe burst crank it, you know, give it a good crank and then let it sit, let it twirl down. Again, it's an amazing fish catching tool. It's one of those things that proves day in and day out that tubes aren't just for smallmouth. You can do a lot of things with a chatterbait and you can do a lot of things with a tube. But we're not done yet. There's also another type of trailer that I really like to use. And when I want that action on that bladed jig to just be crazy, when I want it to just vibrate like crazy and just kind of fling everywhere, put a little crawl on it. This gives me the most vibration, the most action of any type of trailer that I've seen on a bladed jig. And this is a little bladed jig I made. This is a little 1/4 ounce one. These things are amazing. When you put that craw on the back of it, and that's just a little Guggen Kraken craw. I've talked about these. I like these because they already start small. I can use them as jig trailers without having to cut them to pieces. I can even put them on smaller ones without having to cut them down. So they work really well. Pairs up with this really, really nicely. But you can use whatever you want. A Yum Christie crawl might work great. A Rage crawl might work great. You know, work with it and find out which one you like best. But these things here, they give you so much action underwater. They vibrate like crazy, and that bladed jig just looks like it's having a seizure under the water. It just goes all over the place. And a lot of times, that's exactly what you need. I've done it in clear water. I've done it in stained water. I've done it in all different types of water under many different types of conditions. But whenever a lot of other guys are throwing bladed jigs, these types of presentations, going outside of the box, that's what's going to keep those bites going. But I'm not done yet. We still have another way that I like to work a bladed jig. It's this guy right here. Now you say, lowbrow, that doesn't look like it's anything crazy. That's just a regular old chatterbait. But it is not. On closer inspection, you will see this is a Strike King swim jig. And it's got a custom skirt on it, but that's not really important for what we're talking about here. But this is just a 3/8 ounce Strike King swim jig. Buy these at Walmart for like $2.50. You get the little trailers in there with them. These things are really good. But what I've done to it is, this little thing right here, this is an attachment by a company called Queen's Tackle. This is called a switchblade. And these will literally allow you, you can see how it's got that bar there that you can put through the eye and fold those clips over. This will allow you to turn anything, and I mean anything, into a bladed bait. I've done it on crankbaits, I've done it on jerkbaits, I've done it on Texas rigs just to see what all I could get away with. But I really like doing it on a swim jig. The reason being is, well, we're going to get into the retrieves now, and that has a lot to do with it. You've got your standard retrieve, right? I'm using that on a standard bait cast setup. I'll have a 7-foot medium heavy rod. I like to have a more moderate tip, just like I use for my crankbaits. It's essentially my crankbait rod. I'll go from 7 foot all the way up to 7.3, a medium power with a moderate type of tip. That way I'm not pulling that bait right out of those bass's mouth. I got a little bit of bow in it. I got a little bit more softness in that rod tip. And that allows me to fish a regular bladed jig, just your standard regular, chuck it out there and you crank it back. That's where the starting point is. But when I'm doing that, a lot of times I'll give pauses, let that bladed jig fall. Sometimes I'll let it go all the way to the bottom, and then I'll pop it back up, and then I'll crank it, pull the slack out of it really quick, and then a couple little twitches in it. And just that variation. Remember, wounded bait fish, susceptible prey, does not swim in a straight line. It doesn't swim as other fish do. It acts like it's desperate. It acts like it's trying not to die. It acts like it's trying to find some cover to hide in. And that's the first thing you have to think about, not just fishing a bladed jig, but fishing any type of bait. And that really helps with that. You pop it up, you crank it, and then you let it sit down. Another way I like to fish a bladed jig, and this is probably my favorite way, this is the one that I use most often, and that is I do the Alabama shake. Fish it like a swim jig. I do the Alabama shake with the rod as I'm cranking it in, nice and slow. What that does is it not only gives you a little bit of vibration, but the whole reason we do the Alabama shake to begin with is to keep that bait higher in the water column. So if you're fishing really thick hydrilla like I am, or thick vegetation, or coming over some cover, right? You've got some laydowns, you've got some rock piles, you have whatever, this will make sure that your bladed jig is coming up over the top of them. And you can still give it pauses and let it fall all the way to the bottom. You can mix that up all you want to. But I said that I was using this for a specific reason. And I use a swim jig because I need it to come through that thick grass. And that is, I'm fishing this essentially like I'm fishing a jig. I toss it out there, let it sink to the bottom, and then I just drag it along, give it some pops to get that blade to go broop, 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 and then I reel in the slack and I drag it along, giving it some pops, and then reel in the slack, right? It couldn't be any more simple. And that I'm fishing on a braided line. Normally I'm fishing a bladed jig on 12-pound, 10-pound fluorocarbon line. That's what I like to fish it on. But when I'm fishing the swim jig version of it, when I'm fishing this version of it, I like to fish it on braided line, usually 30 to 40-pound tests, because I'm fishing it through some thick hydrilla. And I need that line to cut through that plant, especially when I hook into a big one and I've got to pull it out of that gunk. I need to have the right line that's going to do that. As you can see, there are so many different things that you can do with a bladed jig. So I challenge you, go out to the lake, take a bait that you're not familiar with, something that you're not good with at all, and take only that bait. And then try to work with only that, and try to come up with different variations of it. Try to think outside of the box and do things that nobody else is doing, the things that nobody else is thinking about doing. You will be surprised. Whenever you think outside of the box, you will be surprised at all the different ways you can think of to catch fish using just one bait. So there you have it. We've gone down the deep rabbit hole of chatterbaits, and believe me, there is so much more. Don't be afraid to experiment. Experimentation leads to better fishing, and you might surprise yourself at some of the crazy ways you can figure out to catch bass. Thanks for watching Lowbrow Fishing. We'll catch you in the next one.